I can't recall a moment in world history which has felt more perilous or existentially challenging. The world is facing what is called a global polycrisis, which means every country is challenged by a series of interconnected wicked problems. And wicked problems, as you know from political science, are problems which just don't give up easily to any obvious or simplistic solution. They require holistic understanding. And I want to run through some of the wicked problems that we're confronting, because this is what the Toda Peace Institute is grappling with in our different thematic areas. The first problem is the challenge of inequality. Historians have noted that extreme inequality shows up in nearly every major historical crisis. When big gaps exist between the haves and have-nots, not just in terms of material wealth, but also in access to positions of power, this breeds frustration, dissent, and turmoil. And a recent Oxfam report noted that 10% of the world's population owns 70% of the world's wealth. This is a completely unsustainable situation, and it generates real grievance and hatred and discontent from those who are not wealthy, those who are on the bare living wage, and so forth. The second global challenge is the lingering health, social, and economic effects of COVID-19. The pandemic continues, but at its peak, it created havoc with the global economy and national economies, and most nations are still recovering from it. The pandemic, therefore, continues to generate all sorts of problems around the world, but it's also a reminder, I think, that we shouldn't take for granted anymore health and well-being. All of the experts say to us very clearly that we should be anticipating and preparing for the next pandemic. I shudder to think what it would be like. Thirdly, most capitalist economies are suffering from stagflation, which is a persistent combination of inflation and low growth. And this makes it very challenging for state systems in terms of taxation and so forth to supply the health, welfare, and educational needs of populations, with the result that public provision of these goods is proving quite inadequate for the challenges. In New Zealand right now, for example, as in the United Kingdom and maybe even here in Japan, our education system is under stress, our health system is under stress, and our welfare system can't meet the needs that are presented to it. Fourthly, there's huge volatility in global food and energy markets, rising food prices everywhere. I don't know what it's like in Japan, but food prices in New Zealand have risen over the past 2 years by 15 to 20%. This is very regressive in its impact, and it hurts the poorest segments of the world's population. Fifthly, if these aren't bad enough, on top of all of these challenges is geopolitical conflict and brutal wars. I just wake up every day and Gaza stands as an indictment to me. It is an indictment to my humanity. But there's Ukraine and Sudan, and there's ongoing negative competition between the US and China and accelerating militarization of the Northeast Asia region. And military expenditures are rising globally, and the arms control and some mechanisms are being progressively dismantled over recent years. And unfortunately, the United Nations and regional organizations seem incapable of responding to these diverse challenges. Sixthly, I can't recall a moment when there's been so much political instability and civil unrest arising from economic insecurity and an inability to satisfy basic human needs for welfare, recognition, and safety. Seventh, and we have a big program on this in Toda, Western democracies are suffering from ideological extremism, deep political polarization, and a global shift towards autocracy. Social media aren't contributing to social cohesion, and the decline in the social fabric is accompanied by declining institutional legitimacy and a general ambivalence, if not antagonism, towards politics and democratic institutions. And this is particularly problematic for those of us interested in peace, because if people lose faith in democratic institutions and in democratic responsibility and accountability, and if they cease being responsive to citizen needs, then all of the problems I've mentioned at the beginning are intensified. Finally, hanging over everything are increasingly frequent and devastating weather events. I can't believe here I am in the middle of winter in Japan today, and it's 22 degrees. This, as far as I know, it's not normal. And this is generating, these disastrous weather events are generated by global warming and climate change. And this is creating, what I called yesterday, desertification in the Sahelian zone of Africa and inundation for small island states in the Pacific and in Bangladesh and elsewhere. Any one of these problems is enough to generate anxiety and challenge political stability. Taken together, they're a perfect storm, and we can't grapple with any of these problems unless we have reality-based optimism and hopefulness. The challenge facing civil society, therefore, and the challenge facing all of us in this room, is how to generate optimism and hope to challenge what I call a paralyzing present. And we're only going to have hope if we accompany that with a deeper attention to compassion, with all of that means in the reduction of suffering in the world, and in the development of what I call a new way of doing politics. We can't keep on perpetuating adversarial winner-takes-all politics. We need a politics which places the public good right at the center. So this hope and compassion needs to be harnessed to collaborative problem solving, and the Toda Peace Institute has a number of programs that are grappling with these challenges. So this panel, the one that follows, is composed of Toda's very talented group of senior research fellows who all in their own ways are grappling with ways of building connection across boundaries of difference and are bringing people together to dialogue about ways of responding to some of these problems. We're focused on developing nonviolent and practical peace proposals that will help all of us grapple with these wicked problems and challenges to peace and make sure that our hopefulness is not misplaced.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. My question is very simple. I would like all of you, what's your definition of peace? Because is that something that kind of like a utopian world, or is it or anything else? And then I would like to know how you think we should put as a goal when we say peace building. Thank you so much.
Peace is a process. Peace is about the ways in which you negotiate relationships with others. Galtung used to say, there's no path to peace, peace is the way. And so it seems to me that what we've got to begin thinking about in relation to peace is how do we create and build the institutions in our society which give everyone a place, as Lisa says, but which satisfies all of their basic needs for recognition, welfare, and security. And if those basic needs are not satisfied, we are living in an unpeaceful society. So for me, peace is about relationships and how do we build loving, caring, compassionate, empathetic relationships so that, in Quaker parlance, we say, how do you honor that of God or the eternal in every person? How do you honor the eternal in the other so that you don't ever succumb to prejudice and discrimination and bias? How do we make sure that in our own personal relationships and in our political relationships, we are exercising what I call the politics of compassion, so that we're not the peaceful people are not interested in dominatory politics. They're not interested in winner takes all. They're interested in politics which enable others to be what they're meant to be and to realize their full potential. Any final comments or questions? If not, you'll notice in the program it says wrap up by Kevin. It's very hard to wrap up 5 different papers. I just want to do some kind of quick takeaways, though, in relation to Volker's paper. I just want to highlight and underline the fact that it's really crucial to understand specific local context when we're thinking about climate change, and specifically when we're thinking about the victims of climate change in Oceania and elsewhere, and make sure that the work that we're doing, is driven by their agenda rather than our agenda. And most importantly of all, making sure that when we're looking at the extinction of a nation, as is the case in Tuvalu, for example, that we have some idea about how to preserve and protect their culture. They're moving towards a digital nation if they are finally inundated. But so looking at context and loss and damage and so forth, but primarily don't underestimate the power of context there. In terms of China and threats of peace in Northeast Asia, I don't think there's any room for complacency. It alarms me to see the way in which the region is being divided into us and them. Australia is putting a lot of heat on Japan and New Zealand to join the second pillar of AUKUS. There'll be great pressure put on us to join the Quad. These are effectively kind of 21st century alliance arrangements, military alliance arrangements, which have to do with kind of promoting coercive diplomacy rather than preventive diplomacy. And it seems to me that we really need to kind of make sure that we don't, unwittingly or even wittingly find ourselves caught up in alliance relationships which are, completely contradictory and undermine our deepest values around how we should be thinking to build peace in the region. In terms of challenges to democracy, we can't allow, I don't think we can allow this drift towards autocracy or what we call democratic backsliding to occur. I think this has to be a priority for all of us as we think about actions we can take. How do we ensure high levels of accountability, responsibility, and states and governments that promote the public good rather than sectional interests? And I think this is a challenge which all of us have to engage. All of the sort of so-called democratic peace theory hinges on there being lively, vibrant democracies that can exercise some constraint and restraint over unbridled power. And if the democracies themselves are inimical to that objective, it makes it extremely challenging for those of us wanting to build peace and promote human rights. In relation to building bridges in Israel and Palestine, yes, it's about time. But one of my big anxieties is that the current conflict is going to postpone a two-state solution or some united and inclusive single-state solution. And every single Hamas death and every single Palestinian death is, as Lisa said, generating a militant 5, 10, 15 years from now. And so we need to really begin putting our heads together around how we can think through some realistic, reality-based options for Israel-Palestine, because otherwise, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth is going to make everybody blind and without any teeth whatsoever. And in terms of the future of multilateralism, United Nations reform, and so forth, I don't think we should lose hope in the United Nations. It's the only thing we've got. If there is no center that's holding, then we have to create one. But I think it's better to see if we can move it off life support into a kind of much more active ward where it can begin playing an active role in the future. It seems to me that the United Nations remains the institution for building peace globally and for making sure that regional organizations are kind of operating and acting in a positive direction. But the takeaway I take from Keith's talk is that there's no excuse for us not to start where we are. That is that in terms of peaceful processes, there are so many processes around us at the moment in Japan and New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Switzerland, the United States, which are inimical to peace, which are unpeaceful, which are generating the violence that we're concerned about. And we have to create pockets of peace in a sea of despair so that we don't succumb to hopelessness and that sort of sense that there is nothing we can do, a paralyzing present. And so I just want to also acknowledge that, all of the work you're doing with youth, all of the work that you're doing in communities, all of the work that you're doing through your own political organizations, religious organizations, if you make sure that there are some practical peace proposals coming out of those, then I think we'll have a much more vibrant and peaceful world to live in. And as my mentor, Elise Boulding, says, we have to think in terms of a 200-year present. There's somebody born today that will have lived for 100 years, and we've got to learn from their wisdom. And we need to make sure that we never make decisions now which can't be reversed 100 years from now, when our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will have to survive. God knows what sort of a world we're leaving them at the moment. It just breaks my heart to think about all my grandchildren, for example, full of curiosity, full of optimism, full of hope in the world and in each other, suddenly discovering that these challenges overwhelm them. So against a world of despair, it's hopefulness, peacefulness, courage, love, and compassion.